Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the second part of this series where we're building a personal dashboard app using Angular. In this video, we're going to be working on the tabs. And here you can see a bit of a preview of what we're going to be implementing. And so let's get started. Alright then, okay, so let's go and create a component for these tabs. Let's go back to the code. And let's go and create a new terminal. And then in the terminal, we can do ng generate component. And then the name of the component, which will be tabs. Okay, so now we can go to the tabs folder and go to the template for tabs. And inside here, we can create a div, which has the class of tabs. Okay, and then for now, let's just say tabs go here. Okay, let's save that, and let's now go to the app.component.html. And let's replace this text with app-tabs. Okay, so this tag here, and that's the selector for the tabs component. And we can confirm that if we go to the tabs.component.ts, and here we see the selector. So that's what we're using here to inject that component right there. Let's save this, and let's go back to the application. Okay, so here we see tabs go here, like that. Cool, so the tabs component is working. Let's now go back to the code and let's go to tabs.component.html and let's create our first tab. So let's create a div which has the class of tab, and inside here we want to create a div which has the class of tab tile, tab-tile. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is because we will have the tab, and the tab is basically a container for the tab tile, which is what we see here, this tile shape here, as well as this underline. So the entire tab is this whole section here, right down to the underline, right? So it contains the underline as well as the tab tile. Okay, so that's why I'm doing that. And then inside the tab tile is where we have the icon, right? So inside here, there are different icons. So here's the bookmarks icon, the to-dos icon, and the notes icon, okay? So for this, we actually need to import the icons we want to use. And for this, we'll be using the material icons. So let's go to the browser and let's search for material icons. Okay. And here we can see the UI for searching the icons. So then if we type in bookmarks, then here we see this one. And this is the icon that we'll be using. However, it's not exactly this one because it's going to be the outline variant. Here we see that it has an outline version, right? So it's not exactly this one, but it's a similar one, which is outlined. And if we click here onto outlined, we see it's showing up there, right? So that's the one that we'll be using. And let's now go and import the outlined material icons font. So let's go back to our code and let's go to styles.css. Okay, and let's go here and let's type in @import URL, and then let's type in https://fonts.googleapis.com/css question mark family equals material plus icons plus outlined, like that, and that should work. Let's just put a semicolon at the end of that and save that. And now let's go to the application, and we actually have to put the icon in our template. So let's go to the tabs.component.html, and here let's do i.material-icons-outlined, and then let's type in bookmarks. Let's save that and let's go back to the application. Cool, so here we see the icon showing up there. Okay, this one there. Okay, so let's go back to the code and let's now style this. So first of all, let's actually make a few tabs. So let's just create the tabs for all three of them. Let's set this one to check and this one to notes. Okay, so check is the name of the icon for this check mark, and this is the notes icon. Okay, so let's save that and let's go back to the application. And now here we see all three of those showing up there. Cool. All right, so now let's go back to the code and let's go to the style sheet for the tabs component and let's start styling this. All right, cool. So let's do .tabs to style the tabs container, this one here. Okay, so let's go here and let's do display flex. And that's because currently they are stacking one on top of each other like that, right? And we want them to be next to each other like this. So let's do display flex for that, and display flex, and we haven't got to specify the flex direction as row, as that is the default, right? So if we save this and go back to application, it's now showing them like that, but then we don't actually have to do this because it's the default flex direction, so this will work as well. Okay, cool. So now let's now go back here and let's set some padding. So let's go and set the padding to 10 pixels, and that's because there's 10 pixels of space all around these tabs like that, right? So let's do that and let's save that. Let's go back to application, and now there's some space. That's good. Let's now also set the background. So let's set the background to RGBA white 0.25. Okay, and that's because if we look here, it's a translucent color, right? So that's why I'm doing that. If we save this and let's go back to the application. All right, so right now it's taking up the whole width. So we see that it's a slightly lighter orange, and that's because there's a RGBA white 0.25 over it, right? But now we want to actually change this so that it isn't taking up the full width. It's just taking up the space that it needs, and then it's centered, right? So to do that, let's go to the app.component style sheet, and let's go to the bottom section here, and let's target the app-tabs. Okay, so that is the selector for the component, and here we can just do margin auto to center it. So let's save that and let's go back to the application, and that hasn't worked, and that's because I forgot to add display flex. So let's actually also set display flex on the bottom section, display flex, okay, and do that. And there we go. Cool. All right, so let's go back to the code, and we can actually go back to the tabs component style sheet. Okay, and let's now set the border radius, because here we see that these have some curved edges, and currently these have sharp edges. So if we go here now and we set the border radius to 12 pixels and save that, and now they have rounded edges. Okay, cool. So let's now go back to the code and let's actually make these tabs much bigger. All right, okay, so let's now go and make these tabs a lot bigger, and we can do that by adding some padding onto the tabs themselves. So if we go back here and we go to the style sheet for the tabs component here, and then we go to .tab, and then here we can do actually it's on the tab tile, right? Because it's not on the entire tab, it's on the tab tile. So here we can do .tab tile, and then here we can do and then here we can set 18 pixels of padding like that. Save that. Let's go back to the application, and there we go. That's much larger. That's good. Let's now actually give a slight background to these. So let's go here and let's do background RGBA black 0.1. Save that. Go back to the application, and now here we can see that they have the background and that there's 12 pixels of padding all around them, right? Cool. So the first thing we can do is we can actually put some space in between these tiles, right? So let's now go to the style sheet and let's go to tabs and let's actually give this a gap. Let's give this a gap. Let's give this a gap of 14 pixels. Okay, save that, and that will now add 14 pixels in between each of the flex items. We could have also done this using margin. So then if we get rid of that for a minute, go back here, and now we have this. We could have also done margin right on the tab tile, something like this, margin right 14 pixels, like that. And if we go back here, then we have this. However, there's an extra 14 pixels at the end here, as it's adding the margin, but there's no fourth tile to add the space in between, right? So there's no point adding the 14 pixels here, and it just looks weird because there's more space on the right side than there is on the left side. So to fix that, what you could do is you could go here and we could do and not, and then this is the function where we can specify it's not a last child, right? So then if it's not the last child, then we can add the margin, right? If we save this and then go back to the application, then that doesn't work. Okay, let's see why that is. And not last child. Oh, okay, sorry, because this has to be on the tab, not the tab tile, right? So let's actually fix that. Let's go here and put this on the tab like that, because the tab tile, it's always the last child because it's the only child inside tab. If you look here, the tab tile is the only child inside tab, so that didn't make much sense. But in terms of tab, if we add the margin right to tab, then we can target all of the elements which aren't the last child. So this one, but not this one, because this one is the last child of the container, which is this div which has the class of tabs. Okay, so let's go back to the style sheet, and if we save this now and go back to the application, now that works. And if I go back here and move this outside there and just comment that out, okay, if we save that, go back here, then there's the 14 pixels at the end here, and we fixed it by just putting it inside here, like that. Okay, cool, so we could do that, but I find that using the gap is a bit nicer. So I'm just going to use gap and get rid of this. Okay, let's save that and go back to the application, and there we go. Alright, okay, so let's go and change the font color of these icons. Alright, okay, so let's go back to the code, and let's go here, and let's target the icons, and let's set the color to hashtag 222, like that, so it's a very, very dark gray. Let's go back here. Okay, looks pretty much the same, that's fine. Alright, okay, so let's get back to the code, and let's just set cursor to pointer here, and save that, so that these look clickable, like that. That's cool. And one thing I also want to do is make these flex, because if we inspect element here, we can see that there's slightly more space on the bottom than there should be. If we look here, you can kind of see that it's 60 by 64, so it has 4 more pixels than it should do on the height. The reason for that is because it's taking into account the line height of this, as this is actually like text, right? So it's actually taking in the line height into consideration here. So to fix this, we can actually just make this display flex, and you'll see that it actually will fix the problem. There we go, see? So this one just has flex and the others don't have flex, and the one that has flex here is a square, right? So if we look here, it's the correct height, right? So yeah, let's do that. Let's go to tab tile, and let's give this display flex, like that. Let's save that and go back here, and now if we inspect these, they're now a square shape. That's cool. All right. Cool. So that's good. Let's now go back here, and okay, and let's just go back here. I think we can now take away these colors, as we know where the sections are, and we can actually set a image as the background like we do here, right? And in that way we can actually see how to make this nice translucent effect on the tabs, right? So let's go and do that. Let's go back to the code, and let's go to the app.component.scss, and let's get rid of all of the background colors. Let's just comment them out for now, because we may need them later. Let's just comment that out, and comment that out. Okay, If we save this now and go back to the application, now it's this grey-blue color. If we look here, it's this color here. Okay, so if we get rid of this one and save that, now it's white. All right, so let's go back here and let's get rid of this, and let's instead use a background image. So first of all, let's just go to Unsplash. So that is the site where we'll be getting the images from. Here, and they've got a huge library of free images, so I'm going to be using this, and more specifically I'm going to be using source.unsplash.com, source.unsplash.com, and it's a very simple endpoint where we can request a random image, and it's not just random, they have some other sort of options to get from like specific users and things like that, from users' likes, from a collection. So here's a fixed one, so then it doesn't have to be completely random, but yeah, see, here's a specific photo and things like that, but we'll be using this endpoint here to get a random image. So let's just see how this works. So just copy this and let's go here and paste that in, and then it redirects us to a random image, right? So this is images.unsplash.com / and then the photo ID, right? So that's what it does. Let's try this again. Let's paste that in, and we get another random image like that. So that is what we'll be using, but for now we can just hard code in a image. So for example, we could put this one in, and actually we want a 1080p one at least, right? Because that's the size that we want, and you may want to actually increase this to a larger size, for example 4K, so you can use whichever dimensions you want, but I'm going to be using 1920 by 1080, so I'm going to copy this and now go here and paste that in, and we can get this. Let's try that again, like that. Okay, so this was a nice one. So now I'm just going to copy this. Okay, and I'm now going to go to the code, and I'm going to go here and do background dash image, and then here URL, and then in quotes I'm going to paste in that URL there. Okay, I'm going to save that now and go back to the application, and now here we have this background image here. Cool. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to go and add some more fields here just to make sure that this looks good on other screen sizes and things like that. Okay, and let's make sure that the background size is cover, and let's set the background position to center, and the background attachment to fixed. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to save this just yet. I'm actually just going to go to the browser here, and I'm going to try and resize this. And here we see it's not actually centering or anything like that. And in the case of when the browser window is larger than the image, then we see that it actually repeats. See here, is actually repeating. So these things that I've set here will actually fix all of that. Let's save this now, and let's go back to the application. And now it is staying centered, even on a large screen. See here, it's still staying centered, like that. That's pretty cool. And if we go to a full screen, like that, then it looks good here as well. Cool. All right. So let's make this a bit smaller again. Okay, cool. All right, so now that that's done, we can now go back to the tabs, and we can look at how we've made this kind of translucent effect. And it's actually a combination of RGBA white 0.25 as well as a backdrop filter. So that's what we'll be trying to do now. So here we see that it is a transparent white color. However, to make it like this, we can add that blur, right? So that's what's going to make it pretty nice. So if we do backdrop filter, and we give this a blur, and then pass in 3 pixels, and save this, and go back to the application. Now it's actually blurring what's underneath that. Okay, so it's looking pretty nice. Okay, cool. Alright, so that's pretty good. The next thing we can do is we can add some space to the top and the bottom of these tabs, because if we look here, we see that there's 12 pixels of margin at the bottom down here, and there's also some top margin to make sure that the content above it won't interfere with the tab tile when it's in this position here. So let's just go to the tabs.component.css, and let's go here, and let's give this margin 12 pixels, and let's give this margin top of 50 pixels. So this isn't that important right now, but soon we'll be styling the selected state of these tabs, and in the selected state, the tab tile moves upwards and overlaps the tabs container. And in that case, we actually want to make sure that there is no content that can go and interfere with this tab tile, right? So we want to have quite a lot of space at the top of these tabs. Okay, so that's why I did that there. So I'm going to save that now, and I'm going to go back to the application, and now we can see that there's 12 pixels of margin down there. Cool. Alright, so now we can work on the tab tiles. Cool. Alright, so first of all, let's actually change this image to the one that I'm using here, just so it's easier to compare what we're doing. So let's go back to the code, and let's go to the app.component.css, and let's actually change this URL here. Alright, so I'm going to go here and get rid of this. Okay. And I'm going to paste it in here. Alright, so this is the image that I was using here. Okay, so you can use this one if you want, or you can use any other image, it doesn't really matter. But if you don't use this one, then I can just show the URL here if you want to use it. But you can really use anything you want. Okay, alright. So I'm going to save this now, and then we can go back to the application. And now we have this image here. Cool, alright. So now that's the same as this one. Cool. So now we can actually go and work on styling the tab tiles. Cool, alright, so now let's go back to the code. And we can now close this, and we can go back to the tabs.component.css, and we can now work on styling the tab tiles. So we could just change the background here to the gradients that we can see in here, and we can round these borders using border radius. So we could do that, so let's actually do that. Let's go here and let's use border radius 10 pixels, and let's go back to the application, and now that's 10 pixels of border radius. That's good. And now let's go and change the background. So let's change this to linear gradient, and let's say that the angle is 45 degrees, and let's set the first color here to hashtag F8B5A5, and let's set the second color to hashtag E2D2FD, like that. Let's save that, and let's go back to the application. And there we go. So these will now have the same gradient. In this one, each of the tabs have different gradients, but for now, this is okay. Yeah, so we could do this. However, the problem with this is that we can't animate the background by itself. And that's what I want to do. I want to be able to animate the background by itself so that we can scale and transform and animate these tab tiles just using the background, okay? Because I don't want to scale the whole tab tile, I would just want to scale the background. So we have to actually find a way to separate the background from the actual tab tile so that we can actually animate it. So let's go to the code, and instead of doing this, let's actually let's just comment this out, and let's comment out the border radius as well. Okay, let's go back to the application, and now those have gone away. Now let's go here and let's actually use a pseudo element, a CSS pseudo element for the background. So to do that, we can use the .tab-tile, and then we can use the before selector. Okay, so this is the selector for the before pseudo element. We could also use after, and that would work exactly the same. So you could do after here as well, and that would work exactly the same. But I'm going to use before, just because I think it makes a bit more sense, maybe because it's a background, so it's like before, but really it's just the same thing as after. So here I'm going to now say that this has a content, and I'm just going to set this to empty, the empty string, and we need that for the pseudo elements. So set that to the empty content, and then what we can do is we can set position to absolute. Okay, so let's set position to absolute, like that, and let's set the height and width to 100%. Okay, let's save this now, and let's go back to the application, and we can't really see anything different except there's now a scroll bar. So something's pretty interesting. We need to fix that. But first of all, let's just set a background here so that we can actually see this element. So let's set background to RGBA violet 0.5. Okay, let's save that, and let's go back to the application. And here we can see all of these. Okay, so it looks like there's a lot of them, but I think really there's just 3 of them. But yeah, okay, so it looks like there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's not actually like that. There's just 3. If we go to here, and we can fix this by actually setting position relative on the element that we want this pseudo element to be relative to, right? So right now it's looking for the nearest element which has position relative. So if we look here, if we give the tabs element here position relative, then we get the same result. If we then go to the tab itself and we give tab position relative, then that actually fixes it for that one, right? So as we want the backgrounds to be relative to the tab itself, we should actually put position relative on the tab or the tab tile. I think either would work, but let's do it on the tab, .tab. So if we go here and do .tab and do position relative, okay? And this will also come in handy later because we will be, as we'll be creating a pseudo element for .tab, when we want to create the underline. This underline here will also be a pseudo element of .tab instead of .tab tile, right? So hopefully this doesn't become too confusing, but the background here is a pseudo element, as well as this down here, this line down here is also a pseudo element, but it's a pseudo element of the tab element, right? Not the tab tile element. But that will come later on. So let's just go down here and work on the tab tile before. All right, so if we go back here now, we can see that these are now in a much better position. We can actually just position these properly by setting top to 0 and left to 0. If we save that and go back to the application, now they're in the correct position. Cool. Let's just go back here and let's just restructure this a little bit better. Let's just put these underneath position absolute because that makes a bit more sense. And yeah, let's do that. Okay, cool. So let's now set the border radius. So let's set the border radius to 10 pixels like we did up here. Let's actually just copy these two. Let me just cut these from there. And let's go down here and paste them here. And let's uncomment those. And I can get rid of this one, like that. Save that, and let's go back to the application. And there we go. Cool. So, so now we have those shapes, and we can't see the icons anymore. And that's because they are actually behind these new shapes that we've created. So that isn't good. To fix that, we can actually use z-index. Okay, so yeah, so we could use z-index, and we could set the before pseudo element to z-index -1 and see if that works. Also, if we go here, we can actually play around with this. So if you go here, we could go here to the before pseudo element pseudo element, and here we could give this z index -1, and then that would work. We could also not do that, and there is some other ways to do it. So you could also give this icon here position relative. That will also work. So if you do position relative there, that would also work on them. But we'll be if we just reload the page here, we can just do this using z index. So if we give this z index -1, then that should work, and it will just tell the browser to put this behind the other content. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so now let's go back to the code and let's do that. So let's go here and let's do z index -1 like that. Let's save this and go back to the application, and now it works. Cool. One thing to note though is that on Firefox this actually has some issues. So here we can't actually see the background, and if we inspect element, we see here that we have z index -1. If you look here, we have the z index -1, and if we uncheck that, then it shows up here, right? So the z index -1 is causing it to go completely behind everything else, so that we can't see it. Alright, so let's see if we can fix this by putting z index on the tab. If we go to .tab and we give this z index of 1, then there we go. Cool. Alright, so we have to actually fix this by going to .tab and giving this a z index of 1. Okay, so let's go and do that. Let's go back to the code and let's go to .tab and let's give this a z index of 1. Let's save this and let's go back to the application, and it works here, but it was always working here before, so we actually have to check Firefox to make sure that this worked. Cool. Alright, so it seems like this is now working. If we reload the page, yeah, okay, so it's definitely working there. Cool. Alright, so we can close that and go back to the code. Alright, so what should we do next? Let's actually work on these gradients. Let's give these the 3 different gradients. So let's go to the template and let's actually add some other classes to these tabs. So let's go to this one here and let's give this a second class of bookmark-tab, and let's go to this tab here and let's give this a class of to-do-tab, and let's do the same thing for this tab and let's do notes-tab. Okay, let's save this and let's now go to the style sheet, and now we actually have a way of selecting those 3 different tabs. So we can now go here and we can now select the bookmarks tab, and we can select the .tab-tile before, like that, so that now we are selecting the background shape of the tab tile that is nested inside of a bookmarks tab element. Okay, so for this we can actually use the same gradient as we were using before, so this one here. So then let's just cut this and move it into here like that, and we can get rid of the space here, and we can save this now, and we can now go back to the application, and now it's not showing. So why is that? Let's go and find out why. Tab tile. Oh, okay, I think I didn't spell this right. Oh yeah, so here I did the bookmarks tab, and I think I said bookmark tab here. Alright, so let's actually give these plural names. So bookmarks tab, to-dos tab, and notes tab. Okay, let's save this and go back here. So this should now work. So let's go back to the application, and now that works. Cool. Alright, so now let's go and work on setting the backgrounds for the to-dos tab. .tab-tile before, and let's give this a background of linear gradient with a 45-degree angle, and the first color will be hashtag A2 FFFF, and the second color will be hashtag FFBDDE, like that. And let's just copy and paste this and do the same thing for the notes tab. We will just change this color here to D2 CDFF, and this color here we can change to 5FFFBC. Okay, save that and let's go back to the application. And there we go. So these are the colors that I'm using in the design here. Okay, so let's just get rid of that. Cool. Yep, so that's looking pretty good. Alright, cool. So the next thing we can do is we can work on the hover effects. So let's go and do that now. Alright, okay, cool. So yeah, let's go back to the code and let's start working on the hover state. So first of all, we could go here and we could do this. We could do .tab tile before hover, and we could, for example, do transform scale 1.2. Alright, so save this and let's go back to the application. Okay, so here, let's try and hover over these. And we see that there's no difference. The reason for this is because we can't actually style the hover state of a pseudo element. So this won't work at all. Okay, so in order for us to be able to achieve this, we have to actually style the pseudo element, this one here, the before pseudo element, on hover of an actual element. So for example, tab tile, right? So then if we do tab tile hover, and then put the before there, like that, and get rid of that hover there. So now we are in the hover state of the tab tile, and then we are selecting the before pseudo element. So it isn't on hover of the before pseudo element, it's on hover of tab tile, the element that has the class tab tile, and then we are targeting the pseudo element. Okay, so here this should work. Let's save this and let's go back to the application and go here, and there we go. So now we can see it changing. Cool. Alright, so let's now go and work a bit more on this, make this a bit nicer. Alright, so first of all, let's add a transition. So let's go to the tab tile before pseudo element styles. Tab tile before pseudo element here. Alright, so here let's add a transition. So let's do transition, and let's just do all 0.2 seconds. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application. Okay, and there we go. Cool, so that's pretty nice. Okay, cool. Let's now go back here, and let's go here, and let's actually maybe decrease this a little bit to 1.12. Save that, go back to the application. Okay, I think that's a little bit too much still. Let me change this to 1.1. Okay, cool. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Let's now go here, and let's also change the opacity on hover. So it's currently full opacity. Let's actually decrease the opacity by default. So let's go here and let's decrease the opacity to about 0.9. Let's save that and let's see how that looks. Okay, so there's not much difference, but it is slightly transparent, just slightly. So if we now go down here to the hover state, we can now change the opacity to 1. Okay, so we can do opacity 1. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application and let's see what happens. Okay, cool. So here we kind of get this effect where it kind of looks a bit brighter on hover, and that's because we are increasing the opacity on hover to full opacity. Okay. Cool, so I think that's pretty good. Cool, so I think that's basically the hover state done. We could go back here to the transition, maybe add an easing function. So something like ease out. Save that, go back to the application. But I think we can keep it as linear. So I think we can just leave the default, which is linear. So if we save this and then go back to the application. Okay, so I think this looks pretty good. Alright, so the hover state seems to be done. So the next thing we can do is if we look at the UI design, here we can see that we have this state where it's selected, and it's got these styles, right? So that's the next thing we want to do. We want to now work on these styles. But before we do that, we actually have to set up the roots so that we have a way of this being in a selected state, because these tabs are in the selected state when the user is at their respective roots, right? So this is the /bookmarks root, and this is going to be the link for the /todos root, and this will be the link for the /notes root. Okay, so let's go and set up the roots with some very, very, very bland components. So we won't be actually building these components yet. We'll just create them just so that we can create links to them, and then we can work on the tabs, and then we can work on these after we've done with the tabs. So if we go back to the terminal, we can now do ng generate component, and then the name of the component, which is bookmarks. Okay, and once that's done, we can now go and see that there's this, we have this folder here, and if we go to the template for the bookmarks component, we see this. Okay, so that's good. Let's now just close this, and let's leave that as it is, and let's just go to the routing module, and let's go and set up some roots. So let's go here, and let's go and set up the root for path/bookmarks. Okay, and we don't have to put the slash there, it's implied, right? So it's just path bookmarks, and then the component, which is the bookmarks component, like that. Okay, so let's save this, and let's now go back to the application, and let's go to /bookmarks. Okay, and that seems to work. We don't get any errors, and we see that we have bookmarks works. Cool, so it's showing up here. All right, so that's the same text that's in the template here. Okay, cool. So we can't really see it. It's hard to see when it's not selected, but that's okay because we aren't concerned with this right now. We're just concerned with having the links, having the roots to create links for these tabs so that we can then style the selected state. Okay, so let's now go and work on the to-dos and the notes. So let's go here, and actually, first of all, let's just go and set up the link for this, right? So let's just go to the tabs.component.html, and these are all divs, right? These are all divs, but we want to make them anchor tags so that we can make them links. So let's just make this an a tag, make this an a tag, make this an a tag, make this an a tag. Okay. All right, so now that those are all a tags, we can now go to the bookmarks tab, and we can use router link. And this is the Angular directive for creating a router link, and we can set this equal to bookmarks. Okay, and here we are using the non-square brackets version because this is just a string, right? We could use the square bracket version like that, but then Angular would be expecting a expression here or a property name. So that's not what we want. We want to just pass in a string, so that's what we do here. We could also pass in a string with this version, but here we need to make this a string explicitly by surrounding it in single quotes like that. So let's do this. Let's save that like that. Let's go back to the application, and if we look here, we see that it has this underline here. Okay, so the reason that's happening is because the browser has some default styles for anchor tags, and it puts this underline under all of the text, right? So we'll have to remove that in just a minute. But here we can see in the bottom left corner here, it's quite small, but it was over here, that there is a link /bookmarks, and if we click it, then nothing happens because we're already at /bookmarks. But if we go to the empty root, right, so the empty path there, and now if we click on it, then it changes to /bookmarks, and we see this here. Cool, so it is working, and I showed you the long way to do it with this square bracket notation, but if we take away the square brackets and take away these single quotes, then we can use this version as a shorthand. So let's save this, and let's go back to the application, and if we go here, it is still /bookmarks, and it will still work properly. So if you go here, then it sends us to /bookmarks. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go back here, and let's go and do the same thing for the other tabs. But before that, we have to actually create the components. So let's go to the terminal, and let's try and do ng generate component, and this is just the shorthand, ng generate component, gc, and then the name of the component will be to-dos, like that. and that will create the to-dos component. And I'm also going to just quickly create the notes component as well. So ngGC notes, there we go. So that's going to create the notes component. And we can see that if we look at the folder structure here, we have the notes folder and we have the to-dos folder. Okay, cool. So, and inside them, they'll just have the same kind of default text that says that the component works, right? So this is the component name, and then it just puts works there. All right, so that's all good. Let's now go to the routing module and do the same thing as before. So let's put a comma there. Let's create another root object, and let's set the path to to-dos, and let's set the component to to-dos component, like that. And if we do the same thing for notes, path notes, and set the component to notes component, like that. And these have to all be imported as well up here. Okay, so if we save this and then close this, and we can now go to this link here, this A tag here, and set router link to-dos. Save that, and let's go back to the application. And if we go here, we see that these two now have this underline, right? So, okay, so that's pretty good. Let's click on this one, and it changes to /to-dos, and we can see that to-dos works. Great. Let's go and do the last one, which is notes. Here, router link is equal to notes. Okay, let's save that, and let's go back to the application. And now they all have this underline, and if we click here, then it goes to /notes, and we see notes works. Great. So we've set up the these links. So now let's go back here, and let's get rid of that underline, right? Because that looks pretty bad. So if we go back to the style sheet, and we can now go to, if we look here, we see that the class tab is the anchor tag. So that's what we have to target. So let's go to the dot tab, and let's make sure that we do text decoration none. Okay, let's save that, and let's go back to the application. And now those underlines aren't there anymore. That's good. All right, so now let's go to here, here, here. Okay, cool. So these links all work. As we can see here, here it says that it's the notes component, and here it says that it's the bookmarks component. All right, so that's good. But we now need a way to show which tab is selected. So that's where we have to create these styles here. Okay, so let's go and work on that. So first of all, let's set this up so that these tabs have a selected class added to them when they are active, when the router link is active. So if we go to the code here, go to the template, and if we go to each of these anchor tags, and we can go here and we can add router link active is equal to, and then the name of the class that we want Angular to add to this element when the router link is active. Okay, so if we type in selected and save this, and then we go to the application and we go to the bookmarks root, okay, and then we can inspect element here, and here we see that this A tag has the class of selected there. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go and add that to all of the tags. Let's go down here and let's just copy this and add this over there and add it here as well. Okay, save that, and let's go back to the application, and we can't see it yet, but if we inspect this when we're at the to-dos component, we see that it has selected. Okay, cool. So now we can go to the style sheet and actually target the selected class so that we can style the selected tab. All right, so we've got here the tab tile styles, and we have the tab tile before styles. And let's just add a comment here because this might get a bit confusing. So tab tile before, this is the shape. This is the background shape. So maybe we should add a comment here that says styles for the tab tile background shape. Okay. All right. So let's save that, and let's go to the end of this here, and here we can kind of put a comment here saying end of tab tile background shape styles. Okay, so that might make it a bit neater so that we know what's going on. Okay, cool. So let's now go to the bottom here, and first of all, let's actually just style the background shape in the selected state. And then after we've done that, we can then style the whole tab tile to move up. And after that, we can then work on this underline sort of thing going on here, right? So let's go and first work on the changes to the shape. And the change to the shape, it'll just change the border radius so that it's a circle, okay? So let's go and do that. So let's go here, and if we do dot tab tile, dot tab dash tile, and then here we want to be in the selected state, so dot selected, and then here we can now target the pseudo element before, there, okay, and here we want to change the border radius, because if we look at the styles for the before pseudo element, so if we go up here for the styles to the tab tile before pseudo element, we see here that we are setting the border radius to 10 pixels. We now want to change this to 50% so that we can get a circle. So if we go here and we can set the border radius to 50%, okay, save this and let's go back to the application. And that doesn't seem to work. Okay, so let me just see why that is. Let me inspect here. Let me go here. Okay, sorry. It's actually because I'm styling the tab tile in the selected state, but that's not actually what's happening. We are styling the tab, the class tab, in the selected state because it's this anchor tag that will then get the selected state applied to it. All right, so sorry, that's my mistake. Let's actually just change this to dot tab dot selected, and we then have to then target the dot tab tile before pseudo element. Okay, like that. All right. So the reason we have this space here is because this is nested inside the tab, right? So here we can see that we have the element that has the class of tab selected, and then here we are targeting the before pseudo element on the element that's inside that tab element, right? In the selected state. All right, so let's save this now, and let's see if this works. There we go. So here we see that this to-dos tab is now completely round, and now let's click on this one. And we now see that this is completely round. Cool. Cool. All right, so that's pretty good. What we could also do is we could also set the scale transform to the same as the hover state. So let's try and do that because I think that might be a bit nicer. So let's go back here and let's make sure that the transform is the same as what we have in the hover state. So let's just copy this. And let's go here, and let's paste that in there. Let's save that, and let's go back to the application, and let's try that. Cool, and I think we can also set the opacity to the same value, so full opacity as well. So let's do that as well. Let's set the opacity to 1. Save that, and there we go. Cool, all right. So now it's quite clear which tab is selected, but we can make this a lot nicer by kind of styling it like this. So we've now done the styles for the tab tile in the selected state, but we can now work on moving up the whole tab tile upwards, okay? So let's work on that. So here we have been styling the shape element. We now want to style the whole tab tile, not just the pseudo element. And we can see that because if we try to just style the shape, then only the shape would be moving. And we want the shape and its contents, which is the icon, to move up, right? So we can see that by doing translate y, let's say minus 20 pixels, and save this. Okay, so this will move up just the shape. And I'm just going to show you how that works. So if we go here, we see that we basically have the effect we want in terms of it moving up, like here. However, this icon hasn't moved up, and that's because we are transforming the shape element and not the whole tab tile element. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that. Let's save that, and let's go back to the application to make sure it's all okay. Okay, this is good. Let's now go and style the tab tile element. All right, so this is the end of tab tile background style, so that's fine. Let's go up here to the styles for the tab tile, and let's just style it here. Okay, so dot tab dash tile. Okay, and here we want to style this in the selected state. Okay, so here we actually have to set .tab.selected space and then .tab tile. So let's go here and let's now do that transform. So let's do transform, and then here we can do translate y, and then minus, as that would make it go upwards 20 pixels. Okay, let's save that and let's now go back to the application, and now we see this, and that's pretty good. That's basically what we have here. We could move it up a little bit more, so let's try and maybe move it up a little bit more, maybe 25 pixels. Let's save that. Okay. I think maybe 28 pixels might be a bit better. Okay. Alright, I think that's basically what I've got here in the design. So I think that's pretty good. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's try and click on these ones. It's not actually transitioning. And we want them to have a smooth transition upwards, right? So let's actually work on that. Let's go back to the code and let's go to the .tab tile class here, and we want to add a transition here, right? So let's go here and let's add a transition of all and 0.2 seconds. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application, and now let's try it. There we go. So now it's actually transitioning very nicely. Cool. All right, so that looks pretty nice. Okay, cool. So what we can now do is we could actually change the easing function. And the reason I want to do that is because I kind of want it to bounce a little bit. So when this tab tile moves upwards, I kind of want it to overshoot a little bit and then come back down. So the way to do that is by using an easing function, and more specifically a cubic Bezier. So let's go and work on that. We can go and work on that by going back to the code, and we can add an easing function here. So we have a lot of preset easing functions, and here in Visual Studio Code, we actually have a lot of these ones that show up as well, which is pretty cool. So we might try some of these ones out. But here we can see that the preset ones are like ease, ease in out, and ease out, and linear. These ones won't actually overshoot. So then we want to actually use a cubic Bezier with a high value on this last value, right? So here, these ones have 1.275, right? So these two won't overshoot, but this one will actually overshoot a little bit and then come back down, right? So when we have a high value here, it means it will actually go over and then come back. So to show you, I guess I could click on this one, save that, and let's go back to the application. And now let's try it. So here, we see it's actually kind of overshooting. And it's kind of bouncing a little bit. And we can see this even more if I increase this value. So let's change this to like 5. So that's extremely high and isn't a very practical value. But to just show you how it works, I can save this and then go back to the application and try it again. And there we go. So we saw quite a bit of movement there, and it went overflow. So that isn't very good, but we can see that there's a lot of movement there. So let's change to 2 and see how it looks with 2. Let's go here. All right, so that's very fast and it does overshoot quite a bit. All right, cool. So let's go back to our code here and let's change this a little bit because it's a little bit too bouncy in terms of the fact it's too fast to come down. So I kind of want it a little bit different than that. So let's go back to the code here and we can now change this. Let's just give this 0 here, 0 here, 0 here, and let's set this as 2. Okay, save this and let's go back to the application and let's try it now. Okay. Alright, so I think that might be a bit better, but what I also want to do is I want to make this a lot longer duration because it's currently very, very, very fast. So I want to change this a little bit. So let's go back here, and I'm going to change this to 0.4 seconds, and save this. Let's go back here. Alright, so I think that's a lot nicer. Also, you'll notice that when the tab is unselected, then it also has that same easing function. So it does overshoot and then it goes quite low here, right? So if you look at this one, it went quite low, and that one it went quite low. So what I want is I only want this this effect to be on the selected state, right? So as the tab is entering the selected state. All right, so let's go back to the code. And the way that we can do this is we can actually go to the .tab.selected .tab tile, right? So these styles here are only applied when the tab element has the selected class, right? So inside here, we can change the transition values to be like these ones, and then change this to be the default, okay? So let's go here and let's set transition duration to 0.4 seconds, right? So that's what we have here. And we can then do transition timing function, and this is the function that we're using here. So let's just grab this. I'm going to cut this and paste it here, like that. Okay, so now this is the default, and these are the values that will be applied when the tab element has the selected class. Okay, so let's save that now, and let's go back to the application, and let's try this. There we go. So now, as the tab is leaving the selected state, it isn't actually overshooting, it's actually just nicely kind of transitioning into its default state, right? So then if we look at this one here, as I change the state, then it won't overshoot. Cool. So now what we can do is we can speed up this transition out of the selected state. So if we go here, we can change the default transition on the tab tile class so that it will actually transition out of selected much faster. So let's change this to 0.2 seconds and save this and go back to the application. And now it will actually transition out much faster. Okay, so it's actually using the transition values here when we are transitioning out of the selected state, and that's because these styles aren't being applied once we switch the selected state, because the selected class is taken away straight away as we change these routes, right? Cool. All right, so that's looking much nicer, and we get this nice kind of bounce at the end, like that. That's pretty cool. All right, so feel free to play around with this cubic Bezier, but I quite like it like this. It's quite simple, and it has a nice overshoot, so we get that bounce effect at the end, and I think it's working pretty nicely. All right, so that's that effect done. So we can now work on this underline here. But one thing we can also do is add a little bit of a box shadow on this tab tile when it's in the selected state, which I think will kind of reinforce the idea that it's like moving upwards and it's kind of like lifting up. So I think that might be a bit nice. So we can kind of go and do that now. If we go to the code here, we can actually add a box shadow here, right? We could go here and give this a box shadow. And we could say 0 pixel horizontal offset. We can give this a 4 pixel vertical offset. And we can give this a 12 pixel blur. And for the color, we can now give this RGBA black 0.4. And that's very high, but we want to do that just so that we can see if it's working. So let's save that and let's go back to the application. Cool. All right, so now we see this kind of box shadow here. One thing we do also see though is the fact that it has these sharp edges here, and it's not actually the same shape as the tab tile background. All right, so to fix that, we can just give it a border radius. We can give the tab tile a border radius. So what we could do is we could put a border radius here of 50%. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application. Cool, and there we go. So now it's actually looking pretty good. Cool, all right, so that seems to be working. But one thing I don't really like is that I'm having to put this here as well. So let's not do this. Let's put the box shadow on the shape itself so that we don't actually have to set the border radius here, right? So let's get rid of this. Let's save this and go back to the application And now here we have the same problem because I just removed the border radius. So we have this problem, right? So instead of putting it on the tab tile, let's put it on the shape. So let's cut this. And let's now go down to the tab tile before in the selected state here. And here we set the border radius, right? So here we can also set the box shadow. So let's paste that in there and let's save this. Let's now go back to the application. And now we see we have this box shadow here with no issues of the border radius. Cool. All right. So now let's just work on these values here. Let's make this a little bit more offset. So let's save that and let's go back to the application. Okay, so now that's very, very visible there. Let's now go and increase the blur a little bit. So let's make it 17 pixels. Let's save that and let's go back to the application. Okay, cool. So that looks pretty nice. And now let's just make this a little bit less strong. Let's make this a little bit less strong. So maybe 0.28. Let's save that and let's go back to the application. Okay, let's just try and transition these. Okay, so I still think it's a little bit too dark. So let's just try and make this 0.12, so it's very subtle. Okay, save this and let's go back to the application. Okay, so it's very subtle, but it is there and it kind of gives an indicator that it's kind of lifted up a little bit, but it isn't too strong that it's overpowering. Okay, so we can actually inspect this and we can see how it would look with and without the shadow. So if we go here and we can just check and uncheck this. So here it's not got the shadow and here it does have the shadow. So it's very subtle, but it's kind of a very subtle indicator that it's lifted up. Okay, cool. So that's pretty good. Let's try and see how this looks. One thing I also want to do is I want to actually add an easing function to the default transition of the tab tile so that when we go out of the selected state, it's got a slight easing function on it. So if we go up here, I think it was up here. Yeah. So here we have, let me just get rid of these lines. Okay. So here we have the tab tile and it has the very simple default transition here, and here we have the more advanced, longer transition on the selected state. Okay, let's add an easing function to the default state so that as we leave the selected state, the tab tile has a little bit of a nicer transition. So let's just give this an ease out, and let's see how that looks. Save that, let's go back to the application. Okay, and let's try this. All right, so there's not much difference, but I think that is quite nice. Okay, cool. So, So that's pretty nice, and we're pretty much finished. We just want to add this kind of underline that shows up on the selected state, which I think will be pretty nice because there's quite a lot of free space down here, and it would be nice to kind of show this line here. So, let's go and work on that. So, one thing I want to do though. Before I do that is here, the way that we are transforming this, we are translating this by -28 pixels. So we could do this. One other thing we could also do though is we could actually just translate y by half of its height, right? So we could actually, let's just comment this out and let's do another one. Let's do transform, translate y, -50%. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application, and there we go. So here it's actually moving upwards half of its height, right? Okay, so that won't take into account the padding of the container. So this isn't actually exactly halfway here. It's about probably 10 pixels less than exactly halfway, but it's still kind of a nice offset. So it isn't too much, but it isn't too little. And half of the height will be probably -30 pixels. So it isn't much of a difference. It's probably just around 2 pixels, but this just looks nicer having half of its height move up. I just think that's pretty cool. All right, so we can get rid of this line here and just use -50%. Okay, let's now save this and let's go back to the application and it should all be the same. Cool. All right, that's looking pretty good. All right, so now let's work on this underline, right? Cool. All right, so the reason that we are doing this is to kind of fill the space here, because here it looks a little bit empty here. So it'll be nice to have an underline that will show up. All right, so the way that we're going to do this is we're going to be using a pseudo element on the tab element. Okay, so the reason that we are using the tab element is if we go to the template. Okay, so here we want to use the tab element, as we want it to be fixed to the bottom and we don't want it to move, right? So this has to be here and we don't want it to be affected by the transforms that we are doing on the tab tile, because the tab tile class has that transform of translate y -50%. So the tab tile is moving up and down, right? So we don't want that to affect our underline. So we want to actually add this underline effect to the tab element. Okay, so we could use something like the border property in CSS to kind of maybe achieve this effect, but I want this to be a shape like we had the shape for the tab tile in the before pseudo element. I want to do a very similar thing with this underline and make it a shape so that we can use CSS transforms to transform the shape however we want and then transition them. So that's kind of why I want to do that. So let's go to the style sheet, and this might get a bit confusing, so that's why I put these comments here. So these are the styles for the tab tile background shape, and then we want to go to the bottom of that and we want to create some styles for the underline, right? So here I'll just put a bit of white space and I'll put a comment here that says styles for the underline effect. Okay, so let's go and work on this. So the way that we're going to do this is by using a pseudo element on the tab class. So let's do .tab and let's do before. Okay, so here we are now styling the before pseudo element on the tab element. Okay, like that. So most of this will be pretty similar to what we did before on the shape with this. So let's just set the content to the empty string and let's set position absolute like that. Let's set the height to let's say 10 pixels, and before in the other shape element we did height and width 100%. That was because we wanted it to take up the whole height and width, right? But here we actually only want it to take up some height here, so like 10 pixels maybe, but probably less. We'll see how that looks. So height 10 pixels, but we do want it to take up the whole width, right? Because it's actually taking up the whole width here. So yeah, all right, so let's go here and let's do width 100%. All right, and now let's give this a background. So let's give this a background color of white, like that. Okay, let's just see how this looks. Let's go back to the application, and here we can actually see that we have this white shape here, and that's pretty cool. Okay, cool. So yeah, so all right, so let's go and move this about. Let's go here. All right, so let's actually move this to the bottom. So it's at the top currently. Let's move it to the bottom. So let's give this the style of bottom 0. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application, and now it's at the bottom. Cool. So if we look at our design here, we see it's right at the bottom there of this whole tab container, right? So the way that we can do this is we actually have to give this an offset to offset the padding of its container. So we actually have to give this a negative value for the bottom. And it has to be exactly the same as the value of the padding for this tab container. So if we go all the way to the top to the .tabs class, here we have a 10 pixel value for the padding, right? So that's exactly what we want to do for the for the value of the bottom 10 pixels, but negative 10 pixels as we want it to be 10 pixels away from the bottom and not 10 pixels into the element, right? So if we give this minus 10 pixels and save that and go back to the application, now they're actually at the bottom there. Cool. All right, so clearly they're quite thick. So here we want this to be much thinner. So let's decrease the height value. So let's go here and let's give this height value of 5. Save that. All right, so let's actually decrease this a little bit more. Let's go here and change this to 3 pixels. Save this. Let's go back to the application, and that's much better. And that's more similar to what we have here. Okay, but it's actually too wide. If we look at what we have here, it's actually only about 50% width of this, right? Because this is 100%. It's about half of this. It's half of that, but it's centered. So let's go and work on that. Let's go here and let's decrease the width to 50%. Okay, let's save that and let's go back to the application. All right, so now the problem is that it's not centered. It's aligned to the left. So we can actually center this using margin auto. So if we go here and use margin auto, save this and go back to the application, and it's still left aligned. All right, so that didn't work by itself. The reason for that is because we actually have to specify the left and right values for this to work, right? So I actually have to go here and specify left 0 and right 0. Okay, if we save that now and go back to the application, cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Let's actually just decrease the opacity of this. So we could actually just decrease the opacity like that, like 0.8 for example, but I'll prefer just to put it on the background color itself. So I'd rather the background color just be an RGBA value with a 0.85 alpha value. Okay, so it's a white with a slight transparency. Okay, so let's save that and let's go back to the application, and it hasn't changed much, but it is a little bit lighter, because if we go here and inspect the element and go to the before pseudo element on the tab, and if we just click out of this, oh okay, let's create another style here which just has white. Okay, let's now click this. Yeah, so it's slightly transparent, so it's letting a little bit of the background color come through, so it's not as light. Okay, so I think that looks a bit better. Okay, cool. So if we just reload the page, okay, so yes, that's how it looks. Cool. All right, we only want to show this when we are in this selected state. Okay, so let's go back to the code, and before we continue, I just want to mention that we are using the before pseudo element here for the tab underline, and also for the shape thing here, right? We could actually use after as well for either of them, right? To maybe make it less confusing. So we could actually change this to after, and it should work exactly the same. So if we save this and go back to the application, then it works exactly the same and there's no difference, right? So I think I'll keep it as .tab after, just to maybe prevent any confusion, because we are using before a lot for the shape, right? All right, so we'll be using after from now on for the tab underline. Just the tab underline, the shape will still be using before, okay? All right, so let's now work on hiding this when we aren't selected, right? When the tab isn't selected. Okay, so maybe we can set some default styles which will hide this tab underline. So hide by default, okay? So maybe we can do opacity 0. How about that? Let's save that and let's go back to the application. And now they're not showing because they have opacity 0, okay? So they're actually completely transparent. So if we now go here, and we can now style this when the tab is in the selected state. So .tab.selected, and then after, like that. So now we are selecting the after pseudo element on the tab element when it's selected. Okay, so the class is tab and selected have to both be on the element, okay? So here what we can do is we can now do opacity 1. If we save this and I go back to the application, now we see the tab underline, but only on the selected element. Cool, so that's pretty good. Now we can actually add a transition so that this is much nicer. So if we go here and we can add a transition, and let's just do all 0.2 seconds. Okay, save that, and let's now go back to the application, and let's try this. Cool, so now it's transitioning by fading in and out like that. Cool, but for this, we can actually implement a slightly more advanced transition to make this look a lot nicer, considering we have such a complex animation on the tab tile, right? So, so if we now go to the code, we can now actually play around with this a little bit and maybe do a transform. So transform, and maybe we can do something like scale X, okay? So scale X, that will scale only in the x-axis, right? So that's the horizontal axis. So what we want to do is we want to create an effect where this will show and hide by growing and expanding in the x-axis, right? So horizontally. So if we go back to the code here, we can now add a transform scale X, and we can actually set it to 0, okay? So then it will be completely not visible, as it will have no scale in the x-axis, right? So if we save this and go back to the application, it's actually not visible anymore. And that's because we've added the transform scale X by default, and we haven't actually set it to anything else on selected. So even in the selected state where the opacity is 1, it's still not visible, and that's because of the scale X 0, all right? So now we can actually add transform scale X 1, okay? So if we save that and go back to the application, now it's visible. And if we try and select this tab, there we go. So it's actually growing and expanding in the horizontal axis, right? The x-axis. Cool. So that's basically the effect done. But one thing I want to do is actually add a delay to this tab underline so that it only starts transitioning after the transition for the tab tile has started, because right now it's quite a complex animation happening on the tab tile as well as this tab underline. So it's quite a lot to kind of take in all at once, right? There's too much going on, I think. So I think if we add a delay to the tab underline, that might improve it. So if we go here, and we can now go to the transition here, and we could add the delay by default to the tab after here, right? So we could add it always, right? However, we don't want the delay to happen as we are leaving the selected state, right? So quite similar to how we had two separate kind of transition values for the selected state on the tab tile and not, right? Kind of how we did that. We'll do this also for the underline. So only in the selected state will we change these transition values to add a delay. So if we go here, we can now do transition delay, and let's give this a delay of 1 second, right? That's a lot of time, but we can just see if it works, right? So save this, and let's go back to the application, and let's go here, and there we go. Okay, so we can see it happening 1 second after we've set selected on this tab, right? There we go. Cool. All right, so if we go and change the tab, there we go. All right, so this transition had a 1 second delay. Cool. All right, that's pretty nice. So that looks pretty good, but it is a bit too much, this 1 second delay. So let's try 0.4 seconds, which is the time of the transition of the tab tile, right? If we go back up, where is it? If we go back up here, we can see that we put, yeah, where is, yes, here, we put 0.4 seconds on the transition duration for that. So if we now go here, we can set the transition delay on the tab.selected. So the tab underline, the after pseudo element. So let's do that. Let's save this and let's go back to the application. Cool, so as soon as this moves down from its overshooting animation, right, then this starts. So that's pretty good. What we could also do is kind of decrease the transition delay so that this starts before it's finished, right? So if we maybe change this to 0.28 seconds, let's see how this looks. So it kind of starts as it starts to come down, I think. Or at least it looks that way, right? Cool, so let's just play around with it a little bit more. Let's try 0.2 seconds. Alright, cool. So feel free to play around with these values and find something you like. I kind of like this with a 0.2 seconds delay. We could also add a delay to the transition for the selected state on the tab tile background, right? Because on the tab tile background, we set the border radius to 50% to make it circle and put that box shadow, right? So if we go to those styles, the tab tile selected styles for the tab tile before pseudo element, then here we see that we are setting the border radius and the box shadow. Maybe what we can do is we can add a transition delay, mainly so that we see that the border radius transitions a little bit after the movement has started, right? So let's just try it and see how it looks. Transition delay. Let's just put 1 second just to see if it's working. Let's go here and try that. Yep, okay, so it is working. That's way too much though, so let's try 0.2 seconds and let's see how that looks. Cool, so it's kind of moving upwards, and then as it comes down, it's kind of changing the border radius. And as we set the transition delay on the tab underline and the tab tile shape to the same value, which was 0.2 seconds, they kind of happen at the same time, right? So that looks pretty nice as well. Cool, so I think that looks pretty good. We could try and play around with these a little bit more and maybe try and decrease it and increase it and see if there's a good combination that looks good. But I think 0.2 seconds makes sense. So if we just save that and go back to the application and just confirm that this looks good. Cool, alright, I like how that looks. So let's now go back to the code, and one thing I quickly want to do is I want to actually maybe set some border radius on this tab underline, right, to make it rounded on the edges. So we could go here and we'd go to down to the tab underline styles, and we could go here and set some border radius. So let's go and set some border radius here. And set this to 2 pixels. Because the height is 3 pixels, so 2 pixels should be enough to completely round the edges. Okay, so if I save this and go back to the application, so here we can see that they are rounded, right? However, we are at 125% zoom level, right? because I just zoomed in a minute ago, right? So then let's go to 100% zoom. And we see here that we can't really tell that there's any curved edges. So on Chrome, we can't really tell that there's any curved edges here because it's such a small element, right? There's only 3 pixels of height. So yeah, but on Firefox, we can see it. So here, let's try this. Yeah, so here we can actually tell that there are curved edges, right? Even at 100% zoom. Okay, cool. Alright, so that's pretty cool. One other thing here is that on Firefox we get this outline on these tabs, right? And that's because we're actually focusing on the anchor elements, right? That's why we get this outline. On Chrome, we only see the outline when we're using the tab key, right? So if we do tab, then we see the outline here. But on Firefox, it will show the outline even when we just click on it, right? So let's try and avoid that. Let's try and set the outline to none when the tab is selected. So let's go back to the application code, and we can just go down here and do .tab.selected and do outline none. Okay, and if we go back to the Firefox browser and we try this again, then now we don't get the outline. Cool. Alright, so I think as this border radius is quite subtle and it won't really show up on Chrome, I think we can maybe not include the border radius. So let's go up here, and I think we can get rid of this. So feel free to use it if you want, but I don't think we need it. So I'm going to just get rid of it. Okay, save that, and let's go back to the application. Cool. Alright, and let's go back to Firefox. Okay, cool. I'm going to now close Firefox, and we can just use Chrome to test this out. Cool. Alright. So the tabs are pretty much finished. So what I'm thinking we can do is we can now move on to working on the main UI for these pages, right? So then if we go and look at the designs here, we see that this is the view for the bookmarks. So here we have this kind of grid sort of effect where we have the bookmarks as these boxes, and we have the buttons to add and manage those bookmarks underneath. Cool. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is build the bookmarks view.